Sami, from your perspective, looking through the lens of business here, how has this technological advancement and this disruption impacted how you do business in recent years?
So, if you look back at PDO specifically, look at some of the medium to medium heavy oil production. Take Marmol, for example, where we started the polymer injection back in 2010, and we produced up to 18 million barrels of oil from there. And then we take Alam steam, where we start injection of steam in a carbonate reservoir, it's a very fractured reservoir. 2011, we produced 83 million barrels of oil from the reservoir, and in Amal, we are producing up to close to 20,000 barrels per day of oil today. All these have happened because the single enabler in all those is the technology breakthrough. So we have got polymer, ASP, steam, that has really helped us unlock these reservoirs. And looking forward, it is not only these technologies, but also the more complex chemical ASPs type of technologies that we are looking into to unlock the even more difficult oil, the likes of Nimmer and so on. So it is a widespread of technologies one has to actually exploit to be able to unlock the reservoirs.
So there's more than one solution out there. How would you say that industry is responding to these new advancements in technology? Is there some kind of a resistance out there to new tech, new trends, or is there a widespread embrace of the new types of methods that we see out there?
I think the industry is forthcoming with many solutions. In fact, just speaking at home at PDO, you look at any one time of the day, we are trialing something like 80 different technologies. And that's because, and together with the academia, the service providers, they're all coming up with different solutions to unlock heavy oil or medium oil as well. Across the whole face of the production chain. So it's not only about only in the area of subsurface, but also into injection conformance, whether it is to do with lift mechanism, whether it's with the integrated operations, and you find different technology providers coming forth with different solutions. In fact, PDO, together with the industry, have this platform called IJAD, which you may have seen the booth there, which allows the industry to actually come up with solutions which together collaboratively we can crack problems.
And maybe one for Robert and Brian. What do you think the biggest gap is out there? Is there still a major problem that technology hasn't been able to solve, or a number of problems that technology hasn't been able to solve? And where is that gap for the operators?
Well, thanks, Robert. I guess the easiest answer for me to address is looking toward the future. I mean, over the years, civilization's been continuing to evolve, and there's always been the push for new technology, right? I mean, we had the first industrial revolution, which was harnessing steam power. The second industrial revolution, which is moving through manufacturing. The third, industrial revolution, richly was computing power and the information age that we came in. And I honestly feel that I think the industry feels as well that we're moving into what's called Industry 4.0, which is the fourth industrial revolution. And it's really now harnessing Moore's law as it continues to accelerate. And how do we capture and engage the information that we have that we're drowning in now? We've managed to put in sensors and ways to capture information. And there's an adage that data that we have now, it's the cheapest resource we have, but it's also the most valuable. And I think it comes down, it's a real good way to say that how do we use it, right? How do we put it to work? And I think that's what the fourth industrial revolution really is about, is now trying to transform and capture this information and make it work for us, make it harness it to actually reap the benefits. And I think that I guess I would say that from an operator's point of view, maybe that infrastructure and the investment on that is not getting the return on investment that they would like to have. But certainly there's a lot of fascinating things that are coming with machine learning and the advent of digitalization that will certainly help us to do more with less moving forward.
So what are the solutions that Industry 4.0 will be able to bring to heavy oil?
Heavy oil, as these guys know much better than I, is actually quite complicated in terms of the amount of components and assets that are required. So digitalization I'll give you an example of Google Maps. I mean, when Google started driving cars around and recording everything, I mean, really what they're doing was digitizing the environment around them. And with that digitalization, we all capitalize on now, right? We're all using Google Maps or Waves or some other navigation tool. That navigation tool helps us to do what? It helps us to be more efficient with where we're going, right? Because now we're starting to see traffic patterns, and we can choose our routes, and we can go places quicker than we could if we just went blindly and followed the same old route we always did. And that's what digitalization is going to do for us in the industry. We're now digitizing and creating smart digital twins that then we can take all the information out of refinery, facility, gathering centers, pipelines, and so forth, and capture the data that's in there, and then translate that into the efficiencies just like you do now when you use your devices, your maps to travel around with. So it's a way to lead us down the path towards taking the data that we're swimming in and putting it to use for us.
And Maha has some of this tech, right?
Oh yes, I'm a huge data guy. I absolutely love data. But going back to that first question of what can we leverage, so data is a huge piece of it, and the more data that we can actually collect and tangible data that we can collect, the more we hear what the reservoir is doing. But there's a piece of that and it maybe comes down to the smart machines again. What I've seen is having a number of labs reporting to me is sometimes people don't take into context of what the reality is of it. They rely too much on the simulators and different things. When I was doing one of the combustion floods that I was inside of, I had all my PhDs run up to me and say, look, we've got this, we've ran it multiple times, we have stable oil over gas over water. And it's like, no, you don't. We've missed something inside of here, let's go back and look at it. And I've seen that time and time again where people have the tools available to us, we have the data inside of it, but there's a piece that we've lost in being able to use our heads. We rely too much on the technology, and we have to have that blend. Have to have the data, but we have to have the intelligence to go with it, to match it. The other part I was going to say, and technology is fantastic, but the other part that sort of hampers us too is on the economics themselves, right? It's a matter of what do we want, when do we want it. A number of different places around the world, there's sometimes that a concession has a limited time span, so people do not invest in it over the long period of time. At the same time, the government always wants to make sure that investment is occurring and new technologies are coming forward. So it's a blending of how they do it. And Oman is fantastic for that because they're trying to blend that.
Sammy, do you have an experience at PDO that you could share with regards to the implementation of tech and whether or not it went really well or whether it went the wrong way?
It's a risk that you should be prepared to take. And many of the trials, yes, have not gone well, and we've certainly learned from that. And I think the key thing is not only there should be a technical solution, it should be a commercially fit solution as well, right? So the technology should be able to be, we need to be cost competitive as well. Yes, there can be a solution for everything, but if you're not going to doesn't make economic sense, then you can't proceed further. So there are technologies that are of that nature, and there are some technologies that have failed technically as well. So I think that's where the gap is, to be able to actually make a technology work in the full development cycle, so that it supplements the whole development cycle. But also another aspect of I think we should think about is that once you're solving one issue about the development through technologies, there are other aspects that we need to consider also as well. Like, okay, you solve production, but with production comes a lot of water. What do you do with all that water? With that, you increase the carbon footprint. What do you do with carbon footprint increase? So you need technological solutions to supplement and complement those issues as well. I think a good example of success is the Mirror project that PDO has implemented, where we basically need to get the steam in the ground. Now, if you basically get your direct fired gas boilers and burn a lot of gas, instead of doing that, we put a massive solar plant there, the Mirror project. And that is a beautiful example of how you can solve one issue of developing heavy oil, complementing it with a renewable resource, and you come up with a full development. Another good example is the Nimor wetlands operated by Bauer Nimor, where together with heavy oil comes a lot of water, and today we are able to dispose all that water, approximately 1 million barrels of water, through a solution which is like a fraction of what of the cost and energy usage that we would otherwise do. So you need to constantly look at solving problems with technological solutions all around in a complete chain rather than just one aspect.
I also wanted to ask about the sustainability aspect, because I think that's particularly interesting. If you look at the PDO example, 40% of the base, as I understand it, is heavy or ultra heavy, and so sustainability is really important moving forward. How are we leveraging technology to improve recovery in a sustainable way? And how much of that thinking actually goes into making a decision about a technology acquisition or implementation?
So that is, that's at the top of our agenda. So when you're basically looking at solutions, you're thinking about the planet and the people as well to go with it. I think the example that I just gave on the wetlands, so it solves the problem of disposing water, but it is such an environmentally friendly way of disposing water, and it helps Oman actually in meeting its targets of what it had agreed to the Paris Agreement. So I think the agreement was like a 2% reduction in GHG, and of that, 4% is already met by that one single project. So that becomes a very strong element of your solution, of your chain of solutions.
What about from a more internal perspective as well? What about when it comes to preparing staff? Is there anything that staff need to know?
Just in general, well, staff, I believe learning and knowledge is powerful, not power. So one of the major things that I believe strongly is that everyone needs to have an open form of communication, because it's no matter how smart one person is, having two people work together is always going to be smarter. So you always use that. You throw different ideas against each other. You embrace silly thoughts, if you will, and you allow that ideas to come out, because all of a sudden you just need one little grain that comes out of something to generate a brand new idea that's fantastic. And going back to the renewables, another company I was working with, we were investigating the idea of using terpenes as a solvent in combination. That way we're bringing in the renewable energy. And working with Apostles Kansas and John Bryan, we actually stumbled upon a new type of recovery process, which is currently patented, or being patented, that we have 98% recovery factor in heavy oil carbonates that are oil wet, and nobody's produced from that yet, and yet the applications go way beyond that. But it's a matter of conversations and saying, how can we do that? What new changes are coming in there? How do we embrace environmental impacts? How do we do different things?
What about when you, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to come back to a point that you made earlier, Robert, when you were describing you had some staff that was trying to interpret this, this model they were looking at, which seemed, upside down or not possible. And I think that alludes to a good point that, as managers, in the future, and the things we need to consider is education and training. We need to continue to aspire that our educational systems are teaching critical thinking, because it's going to become more and more and more important as we start to get answers pushed at us from machines or from software or from other places. Doesn't make sense, right? What's my benchmark? What's my decision criteria? And how could this happen? Is it worthwhile? Instead of taking things at face value. And I think that's a real threat, and maybe there's parents out there like me who see that coming too. The kids are just seeing what comes on the screen now, and they're not thinking about what it means. And so I think we need to be conscious of that and make sure that as the younger generations come up and they come into the workforce, that we have the capability to mentor them, to advise them, and to ensure that critical thinking aspects are going to be present, or else they're not going to be the employees and the staff that we would certainly like to have working for us.
What about when you look at this from a more international perspective? When it comes to using technology and enabling technology to build out recovery, is there a country that leads the pack, or a best-in-class example that you might be able to provide? And how is Oman doing in particular when it comes to this process?
I think it's not one country that you can point out. I think it's a matter of joint industry effort. It's a matter of collaboration at all levels, whether it's at staff level, technology levels. That is what's going to make the breakthrough, and that's what actually raises the performance. I think the world that we are in, and the way everything is digitalized and we are so well connected, we can actually exploit the technology a lot more by better collaboration, whether it's with academia, whether it's with service providers, whether it is with operators. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. And forums like these, or virtual forums that are there existing, focused laboratory efforts joined together, having global SMEs that can work across the operators. I think that's where we can actually, if we can leverage that a lot more, then I think everyone will be benefiting and not just one particular country.
Is the Middle East as a region leading the pack, would you say?
I think it plays a very strong role. We've seen the numbers earlier about the opportunity that lies here. I think obviously places like US and Canada, especially in Canada, we've got ultra heavy oil, which we do not necessarily have. We've got more medium to medium heavy. But I think, as Dr. Farooq was saying, is that if you look at, it's great here.
I wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that I agree. Like talk about the ultra heavies and everything else. Like Canada, which I grew up in, was where I learned so many different technologies because Canada has the worst reservoirs and the worst oil in the world, and so we had to learn how to make that economic. But then what ended up happening is that we learned how to do it. And in Canada, because of different situations, we haven't been able to further that anymore because we're landlocked with our oil. We can't get it out, and it stops. And when that stops and you don't have that ability to generate that technology, you can't generate new EOR technologies. But that's where countries like Oman have come over. When I was at CNRL, they'd come and try to learn how to do polymer flooding from me because I developed the Pelican Lake field. And we started to learn it, and so it was that collaborative effort that came in. But we talk about Oman and saying you don't have that ultra heavy oil. I look at Habhab, which I've looked at. That's 500,000 centipoise at reservoir temperatures. That's incredibly heavy. It's probably the most complicated reservoir that's out there, and yet there's a strong desire by many of us that we think that we can develop it, and that's going to be cutting edge technology, and I think it really can be done. So I think that Canada was leading it, but now I actually look to places like Oman where they have the ability to finance, they have the desire to develop those technologies. That I think see Canada falling behind. I see Venezuela falling way behind, and the technologies are being developed here.
Just before we wrap it up, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to perhaps leave some parting advice to the stakeholders who are present in the room when it comes to enabling and using new technology for recovery. What's the one thing that you'd like our audience to remember as they walk away today? Go for it.
That's a very good question. I guess we've spoken about so many different components, right? The affordability, the accessibility, even the levels of, the country level where it seems to be growing, and we didn't get into the places where it's not, but certainly the Middle East has a lot of tremendous momentum in terms of the technology uptake, which I hope continues. I feel it probably will, because there's so much to be gained. There's just have an open mind, be willing to listen. There's nothing, maybe a little bit of time that you invest to learn about something new that maybe will change your life. So continue to embrace change. Don't be dead set against it, but try to think about the things and have a critical, certainly have a critical mindset when you're being told about things. But ask good questions. I think that you'll discover there's some good answers.
I think very much what Brian was saying. The oil and gas industry is always pretty slow in catching up, and I think we need to embrace the digitalization journey much faster than what we are doing at this moment in time. So that I think is one. And the second thing is I think the technological solutions that we have today have to become more cost competitive. The alkaline surfactant polymer, I mean, it's pretty expensive stuff, and we need to get it, as Dr. Farooq was also saying, competitive to shale. So to get that to happen, it has to be a lot more cost competitive than it is today.
Do you think it ever will be, though?
I think we are heading in the right direction. It just requires constant focus and attention. And as I think the price is quite large, and if it is rightly in the right terms of development, contracting strategies, then there can be win-win solutions.
Did you want to put a time frame on it when you actually see that? No, when we might actually see those costs starting to align.
Well, for us,
how far away is that pivot point?
How have we been in PDO trying for quite some time, as Excellency also mentioned, and I think we're looking now at the industry to solve solutions, come up with solutions. But I think local in PDO, for us, the time frame is pretty short. We need the oil not tomorrow, today.
Very interesting.
For me, what I say is the most important thing, the one nugget is, as we talked about, is to become, if you've heard of the term being a horse whisperer, it's more being a reservoir whisperer. Quite often what we end up doing is we have this one idea and say, we want to put this type of steam injection into this reservoir. Instead, what we need to do is we need to take the time to listen to the reservoir, see what it's telling us, not ignore certain pieces of data. I've seen multiple times that we look at 3/4 of the data and something doesn't agree with our principles and we throw it out. Nope, it's exactly this way, and then we go ahead and do that, and then we stumble and we can't get the reservoir to work the way we want it to. But the reservoir itself was trying to tell us what it needs, and if we listen to it and we talk and brainstorm, we can develop.
Any advice on listening to the reservoir?
It actually comes back to experience, right? We have the data. We can't rely on simulators. We have to have our people all trained together and very, very diversified so that we can say, oh, well, polymer worked here. Solvent worked here. We want to do chops here. Here we want to use a sand pack. Here we don't. We have to know what works in different places and then be able to experiment, be able to tie in together, and then say, you know, we thought about that other thing that was going on a little while ago. Why don't we bring that back to life and try that here? It comes down to experience. It really does.